Okay. Capacity you don't. Okay. Deeper. You okay? No worries. Are we out? Okay. A very good morning to everyone in the pavilion and also to everyone online as we are live streaming this event on our platforms, that is including the Facebook and YouTube, as well as through the site of the Science for Climate Action Pavilion. And the website is literally that, typed together, scienceforclimateaction.org. So for those following us online, welcome to this event. The event is titled Unpacking the AR7, the ambitions of the seventh assessment cycle. This is the first event that the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, is holding this week, the first week at the COP. The Bureau members who are here have been engaged in a number of events. This is the first opportunity for the IPCC to present a bit of the work that has been done already, as well as the ambitions and the way the vision of the seventh assessment cycle, which has 6 reports. It includes 1 special report, 3 working group reports, 2 methodology reports, and a synthesis report. The ambition has been rooted in 3 key pillars: providing action-oriented assessment, embracing the multidisciplinary nature of the climate science, and enhancing inclusivity. Now, each of these themes have found its way through in the implementation of the cycle, including the processes that were followed in scoping of the reports, selection of authors and experts, and designing and support to authors. We will look to unpack these ambitions in the course of the next 90 minutes. For those in the room, when we come to the Q&A, please just raise your hand and we'll be happy to answer your questions. For those who are watching us online, if you have questions, please send them to ipcc-media@wmo.int. I will repeat, please send your questions to ipcc-media@wmo.int. And on that note, I would like to first invite the chair of the IPCC, who's joining us online, and internet permitting. We will be now hearing from Jim Ski, the chair of the IPCC. Over to you, Jim. Your microphone is muted. Should be okay.
Okay, so I'm unmuted, so now I can go.
Very good.
So just to perhaps overlap a little with Andre's introductory remarks, when I was campaigning to be IPCC chair, I cited 3 different themes, which Andre has described as pillars, and these were policy relevance, interdisciplinarity, and inclusivity. I should say one of the other innovations I pressed for early in the cycle was that the chair, along with the vice chairs and the secretariat, should present progress reports to the panel alongside the working groups, which had always done so. And there were really 2 aims behind that: to make sure we were all accountable, but also to demonstrate to the panel that we were extremely busy between meetings and were actually pursuing the ambitions that we had set out at the beginning. So the first time I presented to the panel as chair, I think as a colleague, one of the African countries, I think, suggested that the chair and the vice chair should report against these 3 campaign themes to demonstrate that we were actually walking the walk and we were not just setting ambitions and leaving them aside once the cycle started. So in that spirit, what I'm going to do is run through at a very high level the 3 campaign themes that I mentioned, that Andre described as the 3 pillars. And just to flag, a lot of the ambition is actually being realised through the activities of the working groups, and most of this session is going to be devoted to their activities, and that's where a lot of the real contents will lie. But on the first thing, policy relevance or the action orientation as it's been characterised, And just to recall that paragraph 1 of the principles for IPCC activities asks us to concentrate in part on actions in support of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. So the things that we have done, each of the 3 vice chairs of IPCC has been assigned as a focal point for engaging with the constituted bodies within the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, such as the Adaptation Committee or the Standing Committee on Finance. Each of the vice chairs has also been assigned to act as a focal point for the major groups within the convention, such as the ENGOs, the environmental NGOs, the BINGOs, the business and industry NGOs, the local communities and indigenous peoples platform, farmers, trade unions, etc. And we are meeting with each of these groups at each COP and each meeting of the subsidiary bodies, which takes place in Bonn in June. I'd flag also that we are organising a workshop on engaging diverse knowledge systems to address means of engaging practitioners more within IPCC assessments. And I should say that this also covers Indigenous knowledge and local knowledge. And for some of our delegations, they have identified the timely completion of reports as a mechanism for enhancing policy relevance. Just to say, the working groups will get onto that, but the action orientation in each of our scoped out working group reports is also very relevant. Now, switching to the second theme, which was interdisciplinarity. And really, this was intended as shorthand for collaboration across the working groups and the avoidance of the risk of working groups operating in silos. And just to say, when I was a working group co-chair in the last cycle, we made a lot of progress in terms of collaboration. But I think the working groups in this cycle are taking this collaboration to new levels. And for example, the first ever joint lead author meeting of IPCC is going to take place in Paris in the first week of December, a real opportunity to make sure the working groups actually operate together. And there are other more specific initiatives, for example, cross-working group collaboration on scenarios to make sure that we're taking a coherent approach across IPCC. The theme that I really want to emphasize that we've made a lot of progress on is inclusivity, and we've made real advances at all levels there. And the first most obvious way is in terms of simple numbers. We are now approaching parity in terms of gender balance and the participation of developed and developing countries in IPCC. And we're also started to pay increasing attention to intra-regional balance to make sure that our assessments aren't dominated by just a few countries. But just to say the numbers by themselves aren't enough. We need to look at the quality of participation as well. And training activities have been initiated before and at lead author meetings to make sure that we support and make sure that participation is meaningful. And other supportive measures, we have philanthropic support for younger chapter scientists from developing countries to support developing countries coordinating lead authors. And that started with a special report on cities, but I'm pleased to say there's going to be one developing country chapter scientist for each chapter across the working group reports. And finally, one that my office has been working on quite heavily is access to literature for developing country authors, which has often been a challenge in previous cycles. So we're pleased to say that Utrecht University, through our colleagues at Working Group 2 in the Netherlands, secured access through the Utrecht University for the special report on cities. The Task Force on Inventories has received support through the UNET library. But the other one that we've been working on is negotiating email and password access to journals, which are produced by the big publishing houses, the Elsevier's, the Springer Nature, who dominate the literature we cite across all the working groups. And we are very close to secure. We are now into talking about the details of that, and it will be available for developing country authors during this cycle. So I hope in just these few words at the beginning, you can see that we started the cycle with high ambitions, and we're really fairly determined to make sure that these ambitions aren't just words. We just want to make sure the ambitions are pursued. And you will be hearing much more over the next hour from my colleagues in the working groups on the progress that's being made. But just to say an invitation, please come back in 5 years' time and press us on what have been achieved. I started with the issue of accountability for chairs and others, and we must pursue that accountability through to the end. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear the applause. It's not a huge audience, it's not a huge pavilion, but we have a good crowd and we already are receiving some questions online. So clearly the live feed is being watched. Because this is the part where we do a brief introduction, like in a thriller, where you, after the opening salvo, you get the credits. So just from your left to your right, Winston Chow, the Working Group 2 co-chair, then Aida Diong Nyang, the vice chair of the Working Group 1, Bart van den Hurk, the co-chair of the Working Group 2, and Malak Al-Nouri, the Working Group 3 vice chair. And the event is being moderated by Andrej Mahecic, the head of communications for the IPCC. And on that note, Winston, over to you.
Thank you, Andre. Good morning, everyone here. Good morning, afternoon, evening to everybody online. It's good to be here in Belém. I have the unenviable task of following up from Jim, but I'll try my best. There should be a slide deck that's coming up. Yes. So this session, we want to expand a bit further on the ambition that Jim introduced us to just now. I am going to not reframe, but elaborate and maybe repackage some of the things that was said before leaving it to Ida, Bart, and Malak to explain, elaborate on it further for each of the working groups. So what we want to do is, for unpacking these ambitions, we have three things. We want to be action-oriented in terms of trying to make sure that the information that we assess and that we write and that we deliver for our reports, and there are, in this sense, 6 reports that Andre mentioned. The special report on climate change and cities that is in the process of being developed. There is a first order draft that is ready for expert review, and do contact us after this session if you're interested to review the first order draft. It's still available for review until the 12th of December. There are two methodology reports that our colleagues from the Task Force Inventory are working on for greenhouse gas emissions. One is on short-lived climate forces, and the other is on carbon capture, or is this carbon dioxide removal? Those will be worked upon over the next 2 years. And then there are the 3 working group reports, 1, 2, and 3. Working group 2 also, we are trying to develop a updated technical guidelines on impacts and adaptation that will be concurrently developed and will be delivered and approved at the same time as the Working Group 2 report. And then finally, there's the synthesis report that Jim will be leading. So for this, we want to make sure our reports focus on policy relevant information. And in order to do so, it should not be a top-down approach from what the authors try to assess. It requires a lot of engagement, a lot of interaction with stakeholders, not just within the FCCC process here, but as you'll see later when we talk about our work in the special report on cities, we engage with a lot of practitioners, we engage with a lot of, shall we say, non-traditional IPCC audiences in order to try and get a hold from a bottom-up and a top-down approach. What sort of information can help inform climate action in terms of what could happen, policy relevance, instead of what should happen, which is policy prescription. And that's something that we really want to keep an eye on. We should not stray towards the ideas of policy prescription. The second thing we want to do is, as Jim said, multidisciplinarity has to be integrated. And my bureau colleagues and I are keen on making sure that the artificial boundaries between working groups 1, 2, and 3 should not be firm boundaries of good integration of climate information in our assessments. We know that the multiple aspects of climate change, the hazards, the impacts, the adaptation, mitigation, and development aspects don't just stick to one particular silo. In order for that boundaries to be crossed, we need to have firm engagements and integration of authors, thinking of potential development of cross-working group material that can inform the assessments from across 1, 2, and 3. This is being practiced right now in the Special Report on Climate Change and Cities, which is a cross-working group endeavor. And we're seeing that we want to take the opportunity of the Paris lead author meeting that will take place in about 2 weeks' time, where we will have a dedicated day where authors will have the opportunity to engage with their colleagues across working groups so that this integration really manifests itself. And finally, inclusivity. So Jim talked about the massive amount of work we've been doing over the past 2.5 years. We've been traveling around engaging with so many stakeholders, especially in the cities report. We talk to local governments, we talk to individual sectors like landscape architects and the finance community that have immense, they desire the information from the assessments we process. And it's been a very rich engagement. And you'll see that if you are an expert reviewer for the Special Report on Cities, you'll see that engagement come through in the drafts that we develop. And this is important because there is no one singular view of what climate action should be. There are multiple views and perspectives that have to be considered, and we are considering that in our reports. So with that said, with this introduction, enough from me, because I'm sure those of you here and online would love to hear what we're doing within our respective working groups. And it is my honor and privilege to, here we go, pass it on to Ida for unpacking the Working Group 1 ambition. Over to you, Ida, and the microphone.
Thank you. Thank you, Winston. Thank you, Andre. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to present the ambition of IPCC Working Group 1 for the 7th assessment cycle. In IR6, we delivered the most comprehensive assessment ever for the, no, not yet, of the physical science of climate change. For our IR7, our ambition is to build on that foundation, making the physical science more actionable, better integrated across working groups, and more inclusive in the world's scientific voices and knowledge systems. The general narrative is based on the Talanoa dialogue for Working Group 1, the stock take, the features, and the responses. Now, for the first, okay. Now, I go back. Thank you. The first ambition is to make Working Group 1 more action-oriented. And the IPCC mandate remains. IPCC is policy relevant, but not policy perspective, as that has been said. What changed is a greater focus on information that support actions. In practice, that means a new question-driven approach with chapters framed around the key question society is asking. For example, how new observation will help to better assess increasing extreme, or how close are we to critical tipping points. There is also a stronger emphasis on near-term and regional information that supports early warning systems, risk management, and adaptation planning. And an expanded use of the interactive atlas, which will provide actionable regional climate data, connected observed trends, and projected risks. We'll have another event dedicated to the atlas from 12:15 to 1:15 p.m. And also assessing information that enable response and preparedness in collaboration with other working groups. Therefore, the second ambition is integration with other working groups. Integration will happen first within working group 1 across IPCC, but also with external partners. Okay, and within IPCC, for example, for regional information, we need to integrate what happens for the stock takes and the response. We need to be coherent between global scales and regional scales. And across IPCC, we know that many urgent questions, such as how overshoot would impact risk, or for example, how extreme or cascading events will impact also loss and damages. We need to work in an integrative manner with other working groups. And this requires physical impact and socioeconomic perspectives. And that will help also from the beginning to have a better vision for the synthesis report later. Another example is IR7 Atlas. We will build on working group 1 IR6 Atlas and serve also as a basis for a link to the working group 2 interactive Atlas. But that need coordination with working group 2. I will not expand more on that because we have another event. And externally, it's important also to to consult to key external partners such as WRCP, which underpin our climate simulations, but also other partners such as IPBES, to ensure that we have coherence between assessment of biodiversity and climate and biodiversity climate interactions. And next, about inclusivity. We held nearly 20 regional webinars engaging new experts across disciplines, but also including early career scientists, women practitioners, and indigenous knowledge holders. And as Winston and the chair, Jim, have mentioned it, there is a program to fund chapter scientists from the Global South, enabling young researchers to coordinate directly to author teams. And we, Working Group 1, also participate actively in the IPCC Gender Diversity, Equity, and Inclusivity Expert Meeting that was held on September 2025. And we hope that what we gain will be translated in the author team. And we have also many lead author meeting and onboarding edition with new authors team before round 1, what we didn't have in the earlier cycles. That will help also particularly newcomers to be comfortable with IPCC landscape. To finish, maybe some words on the author selections for Working Group 1. We've got over 1,000 submissions, and we selected 193 authors, trying to have a better balance than in IR6, with the participation of female science. I cannot read here, maybe. Yeah, female science, that is, it's female science, sorry, it's 43%. Yeah, female science, sorry, female science is the blue one, 40%. And also having, developing countries and in a country in transition for 46, which is more than 6, which was already outstanding. We also have representation of each of the 6 WMO region in each chapter. And we try also to have, for coordinating lead authors, 1 from developing country, 1 at least one from developing country and one from developed country, as in previous cycle. But we had also newcomers as CLA. And we have also early to mid career scientists for the first time, not for the first time perhaps, but the number is greater to have
secure integration and clarity on where to go to find what kind of information. Another element there is that we will also carry a couple of cross-chapter papers, which we try not to produce as a set of extra mini chapters. Cross-chapter papers intended to amplify the messages from the entire report for a specific set of subdomains. And that also is a very integrative product, because the cross-chapter paper teams have to, collect their information from the other chapters and have to secure that the other chapters do the assessments that we need for instance, for polar, Mediterranean, or least developed countries, which are topics for these cross-chapter papers. Finally, we will come to Atlas in the next session. The inclusivity topic has been discussed by each of the previous speakers, and like the others, we also have ensured a large diversity in the participation. I think we have a record number of 90 countries represented in the pool of a bit more than 230 authors. So that's quite a bit. Again, also a lot of people new to the IPCC. And we also are very indebted to the conclusions that we had from this expert meeting on gender diversity inclusivity. Diversity is not the same as inclusivity. We really need to actively make sure that these participants contribute and not only, tick mark. So we have quite a lot of support for the authors in place, not only with the chapter scientist program or access to literature, but we're also going to help them out with how to use AI to find gray literature. How to actually do an assessment. We will also do trainings on that. And we are currently in the final phase of recruiting in our support unit an officer that is actually, focusing on the capacity building of the teams in there. And a participatory is also making sure that the people that want to read the reports contribute to the reviews. We do a lot of outreach on reviews for the cities. We organize group reviews for specific sectoral thematic areas like the finance or cities or youth. And that, of course, gives voice to the people that want to know, that expect messages to come out in the IPCC report. And this is the process to go. So lots of things to cover. Malak, working group 3.
Thank you, Bart, and thank you, Ida. It's my pleasure to share the progress of Working Group 3 towards achieving the ambitions of AR7 cycle of the chair and bureau members. So basically, Working Group 3, following the ambitions, we're embarking on an action-oriented assessment approach, where we want to focus on how it can happen instead of stopping at what could happen. So, and this approach will make the reports are more relevant for implementation to bridge science and policy. What does that mean to us? It means that producing policy relevant reports where Working Group 3 contribution for AR7 is heightened focus on assessment to deliver our key messages that are actionable, applicable to a wide range of stakeholders and practitioners. And this is following the IPCC mandate in assessing the technical and scientific literature related to the climate change in a policy relevant but not in a policy neutral manner. We will also assessing the feasibility and the implementation. Thank you, Winston. So, and this is done by coverage cross chapters of implementation relevant elements, including what are the barriers, the enablers of implementation, including finance, technology, governance, as well as cost benefit analysis, technology readiness, regional capacities, the co-benefits and the trade-offs and synergies with sustainable development. among the actions that already been taken in the working group 3 is action and recommendations that we have received from the previous cycle. There was recommendations and a workshop on scenarios that is held by the IPCC, highlighted gaps and advancement needed in the scenarios and the pathways discussion. And at this cycle, the Working Group 3 Bureau is working on guidance for the authors on to highlight exactly what are these gaps and give them the guidance during the zero draft to showcase what can be done and how these can be addressed throughout the report. This is also a work is happening across the working groups, not just inside the working group 3 and across the different chapters, because many chapters also are taking relevant discussions with the scenarios. I show here the outline, the actual outline of Working Group 3, and show how we integrate within chapters and between chapters that have very relevant narratives and discussion. We have 4 buckets, we can call it, for the different chapters, ranging between the past and current trends and future, sustainable development mitigation, also factors for enablers or constraints or barriers, and chapters from 8 to 13, these are the different sectors and systems and how do we do the integration. So we look at them as from a unified lens to integrate all the discussion about the different sectors. So elements such as even looking at what happens in AR6 in this discussion, what will happen and the outcome of the special reports on cities, how does it affect, for example, buildings, settlements, in chapters in Working Group 3, linkages to projected regional and global futures, interaction between relevant UN conventions and other frameworks as appropriate as well, and international cooperation and related aspects. We also have direct linkages between certain chapters that needs to feed to each other. For example, in chapter 4, the pathways in the context of sustainable development, remaining carbon budget, a consideration of different stages of development of countries and circumstances. This would include links to chapter 3 on scenarios. There's also a lot of work to achieve the cross-working group integration. This includes the cross-working group glossary, so that terms are accessible to all the working groups. And in chapter 1 of Working Group 3, we focus on how do we provide concepts and dimensions that is cutting across the different working groups with Working Group 1 and Working Group 2. And of course, we have a chapter that is need to have close coordination with Working Group 2, which is the finance chapter. We also take it further. We have a chapter on its own on integration. Chapter 14 is actually an integration chapter that show how can we achieve system integration across the different sectors and across the different systems, including energy system integration, material circularity, waste across the different sectors, cost and benefit, including what are the effects of integration across the different sectors, and policing and enabling conditions, and digitization and communication technologies for enabling system integration and interaction. and their implementation. Moving to inclusivity, and in our ambition to achieve the vision to enhance inclusivity in this chapter, in this cycle, I can demonstrate it in three ways. First, the diversity among the authors and the experts. Similar to previous working groups, we have followed a process that enhanced the representation of the different region across the regions, and intra-regional representation across the genders, across the disciplines, including encouragement of and motivating different disciplines and regions to join through tailored options for online participation, training on inclusive practices to promote greater engagement. And the outcome was an enhancement over the previous cycle. We have 40% of female, 52% of developing countries, authors, and economic in transition. And we have almost 60% of newcomers to bring in fresh blood to IPCC and implement our vision. Another way that we have embarked on is improving participants' inclusivity in the reports, reviews, and planning for webinars to guide the government reviews through the process, and pre-plenary sessions to highlight the importance of broad participation in the reviews and approvals. A third way is similar to the previous working groups, enhancing report robustness by including diverse literature, such as social sciences, indigenous knowledge, non-English sources as well, and enhance equitable access to scientific articles, and host webinars for broader expert inputs. And I have here also some bullets on the left, if you can see it on the screen. It basically highlights the concepts and the elements of inclusivity, equity, justice, specifically stated as elements and bullets in the outline under specific chapters. And an example is looking at equity across and within generations, looking at equity assumptions and justice within the scenario modeling. How do we integrate these elements within the models and the assumptions? And how do we frame mitigations with justice and looking at differentiation between countries, within countries, and between countries? How do we integrate just transitions in our mitigation practices? And it is a broader sense. And I stop here. I give it back.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, and back to Andre.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Malak. We will now open the floor for questions. We will open the floor for questions first from the audience here in the room. So please don't be shy and step forward, ask questions. This is a unique opportunity to speak to the co-chairs and the vice chairs of all of the three working groups that we have here. There is a gentleman in the back. If we can have, there's two questions there. And then we did lose the live stream at some point. We understand the live stream is back on. So for those who are following us live, you can send in your questions through the email ipcc-media@wmo.int. Thank you. Over to you, sir.
Just a quick question. Is there any avenue yet for new author to be involved in AR7?
Can you repeat the question? Is there any opportunity?
To involve with AR7, are you taking a new author? Thank you.
No, there will not be new authors selected. That is, the selection has taken place. Of course, we know that not all the expertises are already covered in the author team. So at some stage, the chapter teams will call for what we call contributing authors. So they will be invited to produce a part of the assessment. But the author pool is, as it stands now, is not going to change anymore.
Perhaps just to add that the contributing author will be acknowledged in the report. Yeah. Good.
Before I forget, there is also, there is still the methodology report for carbon dioxide removal, in which yesterday, I guess, focal points were notified that there's a call for author team members to be nominated for this particular methodology report. So therefore, for the working group reports, the author teams are settled, but there's still one more methodology report in which the authors are still being contacted by.
Thank you very much. And that call for nominations is now open to the member states as well as the observer organizations to the IPCC. Sir, your question, please.
Hi, hello. My name is Julio. I'm one of the review editors for Chapter 6, Finance. And you mentioned the integration with Working Group 3. And I wondered if you could elaborate a bit more on how that's going to happen across different chapters and what kind of integration does that mean for everyone who's going to be involved in it?
I'll start and then give it to Bart. So from Working Group 3 perspective, we expect to have coordination rather than integration. And this will happen, I hope we'll have the time during LAM 1 to have a bug to coordinate across the different working groups in this very important chapter. I'll give it back to Bart.
Yeah, there's different ways to coordinate. Of course, we can adjust content, and that is where a joint first lead author meeting is very helpful. And there is a lot of content where climate finance can, of course, be considered as something integral. There is, always these tracking of the amount of climate finance flowing from developed to developing countries, and then separating between the mitigation and adaptation. Well, that's part. We are very happy that Work Group 2 now has a finance chapter as well for the first time, because there's a lot more to cover on climate finance than just tracking money. It's also about financial risk. But there we also see there is, transition risk to decarbonize your sector, but there's also exposure risk to deal with climate extremes. And sometimes these join and sometimes not. Modalities to make it synchronize apart from adjusting content, we could think of cross working group boxes or whatever, but that is that we leave to the authors to decide. Yeah.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for the presentations on especially the inclusivity part. I pardon that I have a little bit of a politically sensitive question, but as you have been to Lima, all of you, and I'm following the global stocktake negotiations since a while, I'm wondering a little bit about the question of inclusivity and the timeline and your assessment on to what extent, because the argument in the global stocktake negotiations is always like it will be bad for inclusivity if we will reduce the timeline. And I would be interested in your assessment to what extent this is a little bit of an obstruction tactic, or to what extent this is actually a real inclusivity concern.
Yeah, let me start, Winston, so you get to. I guess what we need to recognize there's different dimensions of inclusivity. We care in this setup a lot about inclusivity of the authors and make sure they participate. We also need to take care of the inclusivity to have diverse experts and their literature that is being assessed properly. That's a bit another dimension. And then there is the inclusivity of the panel members, the governmental delegations, that also need to have the capacity to process all the different stages of the IPCC. And I guess there is different takes on which element of inclusivity is most relevant for that timing, because there's also pros and cons between of say extending a timeline for each of these dimensions. It's not a given that more time promotes inclusivity. There's also mechanisms that work the other way around. So I guess that debate is still not totally fleshed out.
TVs in the way. To add on to what Bart said, we want to stress that finding the timeline, a balance of the timeline, and I said this in Lima, it's a bit like a Goldilocks situation. We need to find the right balance that addresses the concerns that we've listened to from all the various stakeholders that Bart said. We note that the timeline that we developed had a lot of, was based on what we previously did in AR6. So that there were certain landing points that I would argue, and maybe we all can agree on it, is independent of whether or not it matches with the second global stocktake. The considerations that we, and as past authors, we felt that if there is too extended a timeline, it might lead to disinterest from authors and commitments of authors. Remember, we are doing this for free. And if we have too long of a timeline, people might just drop out. That's our experience from AR6. But we are also cognizant of the concerns that from governments and from focal points from different countries who say that there needs to be more capacity to be built. So it's a bit of a struggle if you've been reading, and we acknowledge the political sensitivity of it. But it's a challenge, but we hope to, at least by listening and engaging, we can come to a logical conclusion to this sometime soon. We didn't get to there in Lima, but I think there was some progress made in order to get the timeline agreed upon. And we have a further opportunity in the next panel meeting in March.
We have another question there.
Simon.
Yes, thanks. I was wondering, has there been much of a discussion about the communications plan and just within the on the technical side, or just within the author, the co-chair team at this point? Just thinking of how much the landscape in which the IPCC reports are, land is different than it was when this was planned. This system was come up with in the late 80s and early 90s, and how it's going to be even different again in a few years from now. I'm just wondering what the discussion's been like.
So maybe I can briefly take that question. We are obviously aware that we are working in a testing times and a complex context. There is a constant thinking and rethinking of the narrative, and how do we approach that. There is an expert meeting on communications that is being planned for next year. We will obviously be monitoring things as we go along. The 3 working group reports are due to appear in 2028. So there is time for considering. There is, can you hear me? Yeah. So there is, did you hear what I said before? I hope you, okay. And so we will be also following things as we progress, and there will be a strategy for each and every report that we plan to release in the course of this cycle. So yeah, thank you. I hope that answers your question. And I believe there was maybe Aida wants to add, and if Jim is online, maybe he wants to add, but yeah, and then we will go there.
Thank you. I wanted just to mention that Working Group 1 also consult with journalists about how the expectation for the Working Group 1 report. And we have also engaged a communication specialist. We are on the way, it's first time. So at this early stage of the writing process, to be sure that the communication will be thought before the release of the report.
Great. Hello. There we go. Hi, Jessie O'Reilly, Indiana University. Thanks for all of this. My question is about scenario coordination or integration. I know there was a meeting on the heels of AR6 to talk about this. I heard Vice Chair Malak mention there'll be a guidance note for Working Group 3 authors. I'm wondering what's being done to coordinate or facilitate scenario, I don't want to say harmonization, but scenario consideration across working groups. Thank you.
To whom the question is directed, to the entire panel or somebody specifically?
Is open.
You want Malak first, or do you want me?
Thank you for the question. You're absolutely right. We had at the end of AR6, we had a scenarios workshop where multiple recommendations, very useful ones, came out from this workshop with recommendations directed to modelers community, to community at large, to the science community, to practitioners. And one of the recommendations was to provide early guidance to the authors of the next cycle, which is AR7. And this is what we are following at the moment, looking at extracting the key recommendations from the workshop and providing a guidance, asking the authors during LAMs to coordinate and look at how these gaps can be fulfilled. One example, I won't be able to go over what are the gaps, but one example was equity consideration in the assumptions of the scenarios. How can we integrate that, given that databases already exist and already literature out there? So how do we do that in a call to community to have this as consideration? There's different ways. You can assess a certain factors later on, or you can create new models. There's different ways to do that. So we're looking at, since IPCC does not produce that, we're looking at what the literature will reflect on that. Across working groups, this is the mechanism that will happen during LAM is cross working group bug. There's inside working group 3 bug that will across the different chapters, but also across the different working groups to circulate these ideas and listen from all the working groups what are their inputs. And I'll ask Winston.
Thanks, Malak. She's filled up a lot of the important points, but also to carry on, apart from the discussions that took place after AR6 in that scenarios workshop, during the scoping meeting for this assessment cycle that took place in Kuala Lumpur at the end of last year, there was a lot of animated discussions about scenarios because we saw the importance, not just within Working Group 3, but also across working groups, and the modality of having that, the importance of having that joint working group meeting in Paris allows us to have that in-person discussion that carries on from what we did in the scoping meeting. So that guidance note for authors will help to at least start the conversation, guide the conversation, so that in the end, I fully expect, maybe prejudging this, a very strong coordination and cross-working group material on scenarios for 1, 2, and 3 that happens from that. Thanks.
Thank you very much. We have another question here.
Hi. Hello? Hello, hello, hello? Oi. Hello? Okay. So it's I have two merged questions.
which is the first is until when the assessment cycle goes for AR7. I mean, you're taking gray literature reports and studies until what date? Does it finish this year, next year? And depending on where, I mean, depending on when the assessment cycle finishes, it's a little political, but we have the situation in the United States right now, and there's lack of federal data from NOAA, NASA, and important institutions. And I wonder if, if there's any annual report from NOAA, for example, that you use in every cycle of the IPCC reports that is not going to come out this year, for example, so you're going to have a gap. And if there are any other gaps, because some research is not exactly being done right now, and do you have a contingency plan for that, to fill in those gaps? How are you dealing with that? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. We'll start with Winston.
So 2 questions. I'll try to answer both. First, the dates and timelines for cutoff for literature are dependent on when the panel decides the dates of the timeline and the planning schedule. But for the special report on climate change and cities, which has already been agreed upon by the panel for the delivery in March of 2027, we do have firm deadlines for literature that is assessed for that special report, which off the top of my head, I remember the first one. It's easy. It's April Fool's Day next year, and then that's for submitted literature, and for accepted literature, I believe it's middle of September next year. So, and this also partly feeds onto your second question, the 2-parter in your second question. If there are missing gaps or if there's things that authors or experts feel that it should be covered, in our engagement over the past 2 years and counting, we've been saying these are the scope that outlined the bullet points. If there are gaps that might arise because of situations that we can't control, we can ask, because of the strong inclusivity aspects from different regions, we can ask, are there data sets that can be published? Are there data sets that can be studied upon? Can these be facilitated in journal special issues in the peer-reviewed side? If because of the nature of the special report on cities, where a lot of extremely policy relevant information is in the gray literature, in policy papers, briefs, in reports and all, we've been engaging with these said practitioners to try and either consolidate, share with us where they are, as long as we follow the processes of the IPCC that